Hello, Econ students. This is Mr. Stark. Today we are going to start Unit 4. If you're in my regular Econ class, it would be Standard 3, but on this online curriculum we're using, it's actually Unit 4. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different things, from how businesses set themselves up, about markets, different ways that markets set themselves up. That's going to be this PowerPoint's topic. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can tell whether our economy is healthy or not healthy, some different indicators or tests for it. So we're going to start with market structures today. And the first thing you need to know is that market economies, which you probably learned from Unit 1, talking about the different types of economic systems. Of course, ours is not purely market. Ours is a mixed economy. We have elements of a command economy as well, with things like Social Security and taxes, things like that. But we lean towards a market economy. If you had to sum it up with one word, that word would be competition. Competition brings prices down. It encourages companies to innovate, to do newer, better products. Like Coke and Pepsi. They've been competing with each other since it seems like the dawn of time. Sometimes Coke's on top, sometimes Pepsi's on top. But competition is what ultimately characterizes a market economy. So we're going to look at 4 different ways that markets are set up, and the main way they're different is how much competition is in each of the market structures. Starting with monopolies. Mono meaning one, poly meaning seller or one unit. So a monopoly means one seller. There's only one in charge. A lot of examples of this. For example, you could think back, if you remember U.S. history, like the Gilded Age, when John D. Rockefeller had Standard Oil. When he was 33, he owned 90% of the oil in the United States. That's pretty much a monopoly. Or if Coke bought out Pepsi, and they're pretty much the only soft drink producer, that would be a monopoly. Now, those kind of buyouts are not allowed anymore because, again, our government wants competition. But as we're going to see here in a little bit, there are some situations where monopolies are allowed. But that means, in general, one seller controls the business. There are no substitutes. They control prices. One of the reasons why monopolies are frowned upon, we probably talked about this in our 10 o'clock intro meeting after you did the bell work, but monopolies, they can set prices as high as they want them. An example of that is medication, life-saving medications. You get a patent when you get a new medication, and the patent really lasts around 10 years after you do all the research and stuff, which means for 10 years, you're the only one that can produce and make your medication. And if it's a life-saving medication like insulin, you can raise prices pretty much as you want. People don't have any substitutes, and they need it, so that's a potentially bad situation. And also, if you're the king or queen of the mountain, you want to stay that way. So you typically try to keep other companies from entering your domain, entering the top of the mountain. You try to kick them off. An example of a monopoly that's allowed, you see IPL, that's Indianapolis Power and Light. That's the only utility company that's allowed to produce or supply Marion County with electricity. And we'll talk about why that's allowed here in a little bit. The second one is an oligopoly. Ola means a few or a little. You might have heard of an oligarchy in government. That's the government of a few. Oligopoly is a few sellers. So there's some competition, not a ton, but there's some. There's more than one. Usually not more than a handful. So for example, cereal companies, we all love our breakfast cereal, including me, including my kids. There's really only 3 or 4 cereal companies that dominate about 95% of the cereal market. You probably know a couple of them. So General Mills, the maker of Cheerios and Lucky Charms and others are our favorites. They're number 1. Number 2 is Kellogg's. They make things like Apple Jacks and Cocoa Puffs and lots of our other favorite cereals. Number 3 is Post. They make like Honey Bunches of Oats and some other cereals. And then you have Quaker Oats is number 4. And those 4 companies pretty much own most of the cereal market. There is some competition, but there's only a few sellers. The products in an oligopoly, they could be different topics. So they could be different products or different like top products like cereal companies or Coke and Pepsi both produce soft drinks, but different types of soft drinks. Or they could be one product. So like for example, steel. There's only 3 or 4 steel companies in the United States. They all deal with one product, steel. Typically, oligopolies have quite a bit of control over price because there's not a lot of substitutes. So if you don't like Coke, you got Pepsi. You don't like Pepsi, you got Coke, and that's pretty much it. And it's pretty hard to enter or exit the market. It costs a lot of money to start your own cereal company or soft drink company. And the companies that are already there will probably try to keep you from getting established because, again, competition drives down prices. And if you remember from supply, thinking as a seller, you want high prices. So that is an oligopoly. The third type of market structure is what's known as monopolistic competition. The best example, as you can see from the bottom, are burger restaurants. There are lots of them, from McDonald's to Hardee's, White Castle, Rally's, Wendy's, Burger King, many more. There's a lot of them, and they act independently. They don't work together. That'd be illegal. That's called a cartel. They work together. They don't work together. They compete against each other, and that keeps prices fairly low. They sell. This is what important because this is what differentiates them from some of the others. They sell similar products, but different products. For example, all hamburger restaurants sell similar products like burgers and fries and soft drinks, but not identical products. For example, McDonald's has their McCafe options, and they have their different gourmet coffees and different snack wraps. White Castle has their different types of sliders and their onion rings. Wendy's has their chili and frosties. So they sell similar products, but they're not 100% the same. And because there's so many of them, so many burger restaurants, they really don't have a lot of control over price. If McDonald's wants to raise their prices, well, there's lots of other substitutes. Chances are there's a Burger King or a White Castle or a Wendy's within a stone's throw of a McDonald's, so they really can't raise their prices very much. And it's fairly easy to enter or exit the market. So if you want to start your own business, this is especially true with something called a franchise, and you're going to read about this in the next unit. But a franchise is where basically you own your own restaurant or company, but you pay to use the big company's name. For example, like Papa John's or Subway. Subways are individually owned, or you can own several of them, but the corporation Subway doesn't own all the Subway restaurants. They're owned individually, but the owners have to pay Subway Corporation to use their menu and their name. But it's pretty easy to start your own franchise. You already have customers, you already have menu items, and it's pretty easy to start. And if you want to stop, you just close shop for the most part. And the last type of market structure is what's known as pure competition. Best example of this would be like a farmer's market. Now, I mean like a real farmer's market. Where I live, farmer's market's more like a baker's market. There's not just like farmers with produce. There's bakers, there's bounce houses, there's restaurants. It's more of like a mini carnival every Thursday from like 2 to 5 whenever they do it. But an actual farmer's market where just farmers come there to sell their fresh produce. There are many buyers and sellers. So no control over price. If one carrot seller wants to raise their prices, there's 10 others that have lower prices. All the products are essentially the same, pretty much produce, fruits and vegetables. It's fairly easy to start. If you want to enter the farmer's market, you get a permit, show up every Thursday from 2 to 5. If you want to leave and don't want to do it anymore, you just don't show up. Buyers and sellers are independent, so buyers or sellers do not work together. They're pure competition. And usually buyers and sellers are pretty well informed of the different prices that are going on. So in this case, if you're a seller, you're pretty much at mercy to what the buyer is willing to spend on it. Because if they don't like your price, chances are someone 100 feet away at their farmer's market stand that's selling it cheaper. So if you look at these sample questions here, number 1, Microsoft and Apple, that's 2 sellers. That is an oligopoly. B, few sellers. Pizza restaurants, lots of them. They sell similar products like pizza, but not identical products. Mainly, like Pizza Hut has their pasta. Domino's has their subs. Papa John's has their chocolate chip cookie pizzas. So that would make them monopolistic competition. Citizens Water, the only water company in Indy, only company, that's a monopoly, A. And then corn sellers, corn producers just deal in corn. That's what they specialize in, one product, many sellers. And so that would be pure competition. So if you look at these, this would be a question I'd do on the board if I was there in person, but we can just do this as you listen to the video. No control over price. So basically there's so many sellers, they have no control over price. That would be pure competition. And the level of competition, that's the most competition. Limited control over price, so a lot of sellers, a little bit of control over price, that'd be monopolistic competition here. And level of competition, there's quite a bit actually. Next one, some control over price because there's only a few sellers. That's an oligopoly. And an oligopoly, because there's only a few sellers, not a lot of options, there's little competition. And then significant, or I would say total control over price, that would be monopoly, and monopoly has no competition. So monopolies, we're going to look at those a little more in detail. There are some types that are perfectly legal. So disadvantages of a monopoly, we kind of talked about that. They have extensive control over price. Usually inequality of wealth develops between the rich and the poor, so those who are really rich and those who are really poor, a bigger line develops during the Gilded Age. I think they said during the time of Rockefeller and Vanderbilt, the richest 1,000 families in the United States had more wealth than the remaining 10 million families in the United States. Gross inequality. And also, wealthy companies can buy out other companies and expand, and it also takes away the incentive to make better products. We read about that when talking about command economies, that crappy car called the Lada. In a communist country, the government's the only producer. They have no incentive to make better cars because they're the only option. So they made these crappy cars called Ladas that, were missing windshield wipers and, couldn't go up a 30-degree hill without stalling and things like that. Advantage, there is occasionally an advantage, one of them being if there's not as much competition, potentially, it means that you could have cheaper prices because, think of it, the more you supply of something, the less it costs. We learned that with supply. So for example, why does everyone love to go to Costco and Sam's Club? Because you buy things in bulk that are actually overall cheaper. The more you supply of something, the less the price is. So yeah, that's one advantage of having a monopoly. A couple other terms that you should probably know as well. The first term you need to know is a cartel. And I think of these like drug cartels, and those are technically a cartel, but a cartel is basically when businesses who should be competing end up working together to keep prices high. So, for example, let's say Coke and Pepsi. They have a secret meeting in a dark room, and they decide, that they're going to, instead of competing against each other, which brings prices down, they're going to work together. So Coke raises their prices, Pepsi raises their prices. And they keep doing that because if you want a soft drink, you then pretty much have no other option than to pay the higher prices. That means more profit for them. That is 100% illegal, not legal in the United States. They have been prosecuted for that. Not Coke and Pepsi, but some companies that have tried that have been prosecuted for that and fined huge amounts. Example of a monopoly that a cartel we use is called OPEC. OPEC stands for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. You see on the map here, these are the countries that are a part of OPEC. They own about over half the world's oils in their ground, under their ground. And so instead of competing, they work together. They formed OPEC, this organization that together sets prices and supply of oil to try and get the most profit. We're not a part of OPEC. We get some of our oil from OPEC, not as much as we used to, because if OPEC has that much power, they could use that power for their own benefits. Like in 1973, OPEC, which was mostly Arab countries at the time, didn't like that we supported Israel. And so they decided to cut oil off to us for a while, over a year, and that caused severe shortages. That scared us, so ever since then, we've been getting more of our oil from under our own ground, and also getting it from our neighbors, Canada and Mexico. but that's a cartel. So there are 4 types of monopolies that are permitted, that are allowed. One of them being what's called a natural monopoly, and that's, for example, Citizens Water, the only water company allowed in Indianapolis to produce water for Marion County. The reason why is this idea called economies of scale. That basically means that it's actually cheaper for one company to provide all the services, because that means they can spread their costs out to more people. For example, Citizens Water, there's a million people in Marion County. Let's say it costs $100 million to run Citizens Water. Well, if they supply all the water to Marion County, it means that each person only pays $100 for their water services. If there's competition, and there's different water companies, and each one, costs $100 million to run, that means that each person would have to pay more for their water in that case, which is why the government has hired Citizens Water to be the only company to provide utilities, to provide water and sewage for Marion County. This is kind of like a monopoly on a leash. It's a monopoly, only one seller, but the government makes sure that Citizens Water doesn't raise prices too much. There's a contract, so if Citizens Water breaks the contract, the government will get another company to provide the water, which is very bad for Citizens Water because they get a lot from government contracts. Second type is what's called a government monopoly. This is where the government actually provides the service. They don't hire a company, they provide the service, like the Postal Service, the USPS, your friendly neighborhood postal workers deliver your mail. Only one company or only one organization does that. That's the federal government through the Postal Service. Now, the reason why the government provides it is not because they want to, look at your mail or have their hands in our private lives, but because there's no other private company that really wants to do it. It's not a profitable business. Delivering snail mail and producing it and managing it and selling stamps is not a profitable business. The post office loses billions of dollars every year. It's just not a profitable business, so no private company in their right mind would ever want to do it. Other examples of this would be like public transportation, like Indigo. Indigo's a city government funded public service, or subways or things like that. Subways like in New York or Washington, D.C. Government only provides those because no one else would. Public transportation is not profitable. And of course, the government sets reasonable prices. Their job is not to make profit, their job is to provide a service at an affordable price. The next one is called a technological monopoly, and this is really a patent. A patent means that you are the first one to come up with the idea. You are the only one that's allowed to then sell your product for a certain number of years. Patents can be anywhere between 15 and 20 years. For those 15 or 20 years, you have a monopoly. You're the only one allowed to sell that product. And you can set prices whatever you want for the most part, like Polaroid cameras. When I was a kid, the only instant photos we had were these big blocky Polaroid cameras, which cost $10 for a 10-pack of film. Now we have it everywhere. But Polaroid cameras made a lot of money while they had a monopoly. And again, that's because of patents. That's the barrier of entry. But patents run out usually within 15 to 20 years, and for the most part, you can't renew them. Again, our government allows your monopoly for a short period of time, 15 to 20 years, because they want you to have an incentive to keep making newer, better products. And the last one's called a geographic monopoly. This is only one seller by default. Maybe you're the only lone gas station in the Arizona desert. You have a monopoly. You can set prices whatever you want. It's not good for buyers because they have to pay your high price. Now, are you actively forcing other companies out? No, there's just no other gas station that wants to go there because there's not enough business. Or NFL sports teams. We love our Colts in Indianapolis, at least most of us do, for good or bad. But they are the only NFL team in Indianapolis. They have a geographic monopoly. Now, they're not trying to keep other teams from coming to Indy. There's just not enough support or money or fans to have 2 football teams. Or like the Indianapolis Zoo. The zoo's really nice, gets a lot of business, but there's not enough people or support to have another zoo in Indianapolis. So those, again, are geographic monopolies.